Hello, my name is Bethany Parsons and I'm here with Dr. John Sellars at the Monash University Prato Centre. We are here in the context of a research programme in philosophy called Prospects for an Ethics of Self-Cultivation, funded by the Monash-Warwick Research Alliance. The programme investigates the ethics of the Hellenistic thinkers and their influence on modern philosophy. John Sellars is based at the Philosophy Department of King's College London and specialises in Hellenistic philosophy, Stoicism in particular. John is the author of 2 books, one titled The Art of Living and the other Stoicism. I'm very happy to be able to ask him some questions about his work. Dr. Sellars, could you say something in general about the Hellenistic philosophers? Who were they and what makes them so interesting?
Okay, so the Hellenistic philosophers were around in a period just after the most famous Greek philosophers, so Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. Around 300 BC the period starts and it goes on for about 3 centuries. And the most famous schools that arrive in that period are the Stoics and the Epicureans. These are new philosophical schools that didn't exist beforehand. And the schools set up by the earlier Greek philosophers, by Plato and by Aristotle, those continue during this period as well. So we have Plato's Academy, which transforms itself. The members of Plato's Academy at this time become skeptical. So we have a skeptical tradition within Plato's Academy, alongside these 2 new schools, the Stoics and the Epicureans, all interested in questions about how to live and how to live well, and drawing on a wide range of previous philosophical arguments and interested in a wide range of philosophical problems in ethics and in physics, but often orientated underneath this kind of broader question of how to lead a good life.
Could you say something about the idea of self-cultivation? What does it mean to cultivate oneself, especially for the schools you are interested in?
Well, it varies from school to school. So for the Stoics, self-cultivation means developing one's virtue, and we might best think about that as developing an excellent state of mind, an excellent internal state of mind, which they identify with becoming a rational agent. So part of that involves overcoming emotions, which they think are irrational disturbances, and developing a whole series of positive internal character traits, which they think are key both to being a kind of a good agent in the world, but also to leading a good life. So if we can develop these internal skills, this internal excellence and these virtues, then not only will we overcome a whole series of internal mental disturbances that tend to upset people, things like anger and distress and grief and these sorts of things, but also we'll function much better as agents in the world because we'll be more rational, and also we'll lead happier lives as well. So for the Stoics, this is what self-cultivation really means. For the Epicureans, again, they're interested in overcoming internal mental disturbances, things that upset people in their everyday life. So anxieties and fears in particular, the Epicureans are concerned about. Fear about death and fear about the gods, which at that time at least was something that was considered very significant. So how do we overcome those sorts of internal mental disturbances and be able to lead a tranquil life? So that's really what the Epicureans are concerned about. So again, it's internal psychological work that needs to be done. So it's not so much cultivating the self, as if there were such a thing as the self, but it's cultivating oneself so that one becomes a different person, thinks in a different way, and so functions more effectively. Hopefully both as an agent within the world, but also so that one leads a happier life. And also for the skeptics, or at least some of the skeptics, who again think that if we actually stop believing a whole series of things, if we don't have a series of dogmatic claims about the way we think the world really is, we'll also reach a state of tranquility and untroubledness, and we'll be able to escape a whole series of emotional distresses that otherwise might afflict us. So, yeah.
Thank you. So this is not the kind of ethics we now typically study in moral philosophy. How does it differ from moral philosophy today?
Well, a lot of modern philosophy, modern moral philosophy, particularly since the 18th century, has been focused on what people ought to do. So there's a Kantian tradition that focuses on what the right thing to do is in any specific situation. And there's a utilitarian tradition that's also interested in what the right thing is to do, based on weighing up the positive and negative outcomes that might come from the action. These kind of ancient approaches aren't so interested in what people ought to do, and they're also not so interested in the outcome of individuals' actions. They're much more concerned with developing the individual's character. So rather than focusing on the particular actions that one ought or ought not to do, it's about developing your character, yourself, so that you produce the right kinds of actions. The actions flow from the self-transformation, and it's the self-transformation that matters. So rather than following a set of rules so you do the right thing, you become the right type of person, so then you just naturally do the right thing. So that's the kind of the major difference. But over the last couple of decades, there has been a rise of something that people call virtue ethics, which was an earlier attempt to go back to this ancient way of thinking and develop a modern moral theory based on this notion of developing one's character. But the modern virtue ethics has always tended to look to Aristotle as the source of inspiration, and so the Stoic and Epicurean, these Hellenistic ways of thinking about cultivating the self, they've not really featured so much in that modern attempt to revive some of these ancient ideas. So they're still kind of underexplored, I think.
What are your thoughts on the future of the idea of ethical self-cultivation? Do you think it has a future? And if so, in what form?
Well, recently, in the last couple of years, I've been involved in a project called Stoicism Today, which has been about presenting Stoic material in particular to a wide popular audience, really to see if any of the ancient advice and guidance and ideas that the Stoics offer for how people ought to live might work today, might be attractive to people today. And that's had an overwhelming response. There's been a huge popularity, a huge interest, I should say, from the public in this material. And we've been amazed about how many people have thought that this would be an interesting thing to look at, and have reported that they've gained benefit from following some of these ancient practices. And I think in America there's a thriving kind of Stoic community where people are looking for life guidance, for want of a better word. Often they're looking for secular life guidance. They don't want to look to a religious way of life, but they want some kind of framework in which they can think about their lives, not just a set of rules, but something broader than that. And Stoicism is one tradition that looks like it could offer them something like that. And there's also a lot of people that have either kind of turned to something like Buddhism looking for this sort of life guidance, or the sorts of people that would like to, but for whatever reason have been kind of put off looking at Buddhism. Either the cultural distance just is too much for them, and often those people are very surprised to find that there's a tradition within Western culture that does many of the same sorts of things, and that's grounded on a set of kind of rational philosophical arguments that is again quite appealing to a modern secular audience, that can give you many of those things. So if going off to Japan and sitting in a Zen monastery is attractive in some ways, but very daunting in others, because we're very conscious it's not our culture and we don't really understand what that involves. If we can find a tradition within Western culture that's very familiar to us, because Shakespeare draws on it and Newton draws on it and all sorts of other very significant figures within Western culture have turned to these ideas, then that's something we might feel a bit more at home with. And it's striking that not that long ago, studying the key sources for this material was a standard part of a liberal humanistic education in the West. Everyone knew this in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, and it's only more recently that we've kind of lost touch with these traditions of thinking, because classical education is not as strong as it used to be in many Western cultures, particularly English-speaking cultures.
Would you be able to share something about your current work, and perhaps how this relates to the things that we just discussed?
Yeah, I'm working on two books at the moment. One of them is a general overview of Hellenistic philosophy, so it's an attempt to discuss all three of the traditions that I talked about a bit earlier, Stoics, Epicureans, and the skeptical tradition, and look at their philosophies, try to understand all the different arguments that they make on a range of issues, but also to subsume those within the wider framework of what do they think this is all for, what's the point of it, and the idea that this is all towards trying to live well. So that's one thing that I've been working on. The other book project I've been working on at the moment is a book on the impact of Stoic ideas in particular in the Western tradition. So from late antiquity right up to the present day, and the way in which Stoic ideas have informed both the history of philosophy, but also literature, a whole series of other domains. The ideas crop up in theological debates, in scientific debates, and the way in which this has actually been an important part of the Western tradition all the way through. And although at certain moments we might kind of forget that, its influences are everywhere once you start looking. So those are the two things that I'm working on at the moment.
Thank you very much for your time. But more information about our research project and Dr. Sellars' books can be found in the description of this video. Don't forget to check out the other interviews and lectures of the project, Prospects for an Ethics of Self-Cultivation.